By the time my son told me, "Give us $100,000 for our dream house, or you are no longer part of this family," his voice was already trembling with anger, and it was Christmas dinner. I did not raise my voice or react the way he expected. I simply smiled, reached for the envelope I had prepared, and slid it across the table toward him, already knowing this moment was only the opening act. When he tore it open and read what was inside, his face drained of color. His mouth fell open as he shouted, "This cannot be real!" Betrayal has a way of demanding repayment, and I knew the consequences he had set in motion would land far harder than he could imagine. The turkey sat untouched in the center of the table, heat still curling up from its golden skin, almost like a warning sign I should have noticed hours earlier. The smell of herbs and butter filled the room, but no one seemed hungry anymore. My son, now named Daniel, tapped his fork against the edge of his plate with slow, deliberate precision. Each metallic click sounded like a countdown, something ominous, ticking closer with every second. I did not yet know exactly what was coming, but I felt it gathering in my dining room, thick and electric, the way the air feels right before a thunderstorm breaks. "Dad, you know the Carters just bought that colonial over in Westport," my daughter-in-law, now called Melissa, said casually. Her tone was carefully rehearsed, the kind of relaxed delivery she always used right before saying something strategic. She nudged at her cranberry sauce with her fork without actually taking a bite. 4 bedrooms? 3 bathrooms? Emily posted pictures online yesterday. The kitchen alone is incredible. I nodded and kept slicing my turkey as if nothing unusual was happening. After 38 years working in real estate appraisal and valuation, I had developed a sharp instinct for recognizing when someone was building toward a pitch. Melissa's perfectly manicured fingers tapped once against the stem of her wine glass, a nervous habit she never realized she had. "That is great for them," I replied evenly. "They are younger than we are," Daniel added, his voice sharpening. "Ryan is still grinding away at his firm, no inheritance, no handouts, and they still pulled it off." My 14-year-old grandson, now named Ethan, shifted uncomfortably in the chair beside me, his eyes glued to his plate. Across the table, my granddaughter, Claire, scrolled through her phone with exaggerated disinterest, but I noticed how tight her shoulders were. Both kids could sense what was coming. They had learned those survival instincts early, the same way I had when I was young, back when my own father's moods could turn a family dinner into something resembling a courtroom interrogation. "This house is way too big for just you anyway," Daniel continued, waving his fork around the room. 4 bedrooms, all this space, and you are rattling around here by yourself. Financially, it does not make sense. The chandelier my late wife had chosen decades earlier cast a warm glow over the long mahogany table, highlighting every familiar scratch in memory. That was it. The opening move had finally landed. "I like having room to breathe," I said calmly. "Well, we do not have that option," Melissa replied, smiling without warmth. "For 3 years now, we have helped you maintain this place. We pay bills, coordinate repairs, and make sure you are not alone." "I never asked you to move in with me," I said softly. Daniel's jaw tightened, the muscle in his cheek twitching the same way it always had right before he lost his temper. He inherited that trait from me, though I had learned to rein mine in decades ago. He never had. "That is not the issue," he snapped, slamming his fork down hard enough to make Ethan flinch. "The issue is that we finally found our dream house, a real chance to move forward." "Good for you," I replied. "Where is it?" "Lakeview Drive, Westport," Melissa said, her voice suddenly breathless with excitement as her carefully maintained composure slipped. "Brand new build, high-end finishes, 5 bedrooms. The developer is offering a special price, only $1,340,000. I took a slow sip of water, giving myself time to think. Waterfront adjacent property in that area at that price usually meant hidden structural problems or an inflated valuation designed to trap an overeager buyer. My professional instincts immediately began cataloging potential red flags. "That is a major commitment," I said. "It is our future," Daniel insisted, "but we have to move quickly. They want $100,000 down by January 15th just to lock it in." The room fell silent. The only sound was the old grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hallway. I could feel everyone watching me now. Daniel's stare was challenging, Melissa's was calculating, Claire's was curious, and Ethan's was openly anxious. $100,000? I repeated. "In cash," Melissa added quickly. "The developer requires it, no exceptions." I set my glass down and looked directly at my son. "And you are telling me this because—" Daniel leaned forward, planting his forearms on the table. "Because you are going to give us the money. We are family. This house alone," he said, gesturing around the room, "is worth $847,000. You have equity. You have retirement savings. $100,000 is nothing to you, and it changes everything for us." "Nothing to me?" I echoed, letting the words linger. "You know what I mean," he said impatiently, but his tone shifted, sharpening into something dangerous. "You are 67 years old. How long do you plan to keep living in this place like it is a museum? What exactly are you saving all of this for?" "Daniel," I began. "No," he interrupted, his voice rising. "We have waited long enough. We moved in here, put our lives on hold, took care of you, and now we are asking for one thing, one investment in your son's future and your grandchildren's future." He stood abruptly, his tall frame looming over the table. "So here's how this goes. You give us the down payment money, or you make it clear that we are no longer a family." "Make it clear how?" I asked quietly. Melissa reached for his arm, but not to stop him. It was encouragement, not restraint. It was not restraint at all. I could see the encouragement written plainly in her posture, in the pleased glint in her eyes. Melissa was satisfied. This had been planned carefully, every word rehearsed. "Either you support this family," Daniel said coldly, his voice spreading through my dining room like ice flooding a basement, "or you are no longer part of it. It is your decision, Dad. $100,000, or you never see these grandchildren again. No more Sunday dinners, no more holidays. You will grow old and die alone in this oversized house, surrounded by your antique clocks and your professional ego, with no one left who cares." Claire's fork slipped from her hand and clattered against her plate. Ethan's face drained of color so fast it frightened me. I did not look at either of them. I kept my eyes fixed on my son, watching him turn into someone I barely recognized, or perhaps someone I had been unwilling to truly see for a very long time. The silence stretched out between us. 5 seconds, then 10, then 15. No one spoke. The clock in the hallway kept ticking, loud and unforgiving. Finally, I pushed my chair back and stood. The legs scraped across the hardwood floor with a sharp, final sound, like a door slamming shut. "I will be right back," I said evenly. I walked out of the dining room and into my study, my steps steady and controlled, despite the adrenaline surging through my body. Behind me, I heard Melissa hiss something under her breath to Daniel, followed by his low, confident laugh. They believed they had won. They assumed I would return with my checkbook, with an apology, with surrender neatly wrapped in a bow. The white envelope sat exactly where I had placed it 4 days earlier, inside the top drawer of my desk. I picked it up and felt how light it was in my hand. Just paper. Just ink. And yet It carried a truth heavy enough to crush the fantasy they had built around my silence. When I walked back into the dining room, Daniel was already smiling. It was that smug, victorious grin that said he had never doubted his ultimatum would work. Melissa's eyes gleamed with triumph. Even Claire had straightened in her chair, likely imagining what her slice of Westport prosperity might look like. Only Ethan looked ill, his shoulders tense and his eyes wide. I placed the envelope on the table directly in front of Daniel's plate. "Here," I said. Daniel picked it up immediately, his movements confident, almost eager. He tore it open without hesitation. I watched his face closely as he scanned the document. His smile locked in place. Confusion flickered, then spread, then collapsed into pure dread. "What is this?" he began. "Living trust declaration for the property at 1847 Timber Ridge Road," I said quietly. "Dated December 22nd, 2024. Properly notarized and officially recorded with the county clerk. I am the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary. The property cannot be sold, borrowed against, transferred, or leveraged in any way without my written consent, which I am not legally required to give." Daniel's face turned the color of chalk. Melissa yanked the document from his hands and skimmed the dense legal language, her breathing growing shallow as panic replaced her confidence. "The house is fully protected," I continued calmly. "Any attempt to claim ownership, falsify my signature, or obtain credit using this property as collateral will trigger immediate legal action. I wanted to be certain everyone at this table understood exactly where things stand." "You," Daniel's voice cracked. "This is not real. You could not have done this. You would not do this to us." "I did," I said, meeting his eyes. "Last Wednesday, actually. When you spend nearly 4 decades appraising property, you learn very quickly which attorneys specialize in asset protection." Melissa jumped to her feet so fast that her chair tipped over behind her. "You bitter old man," she shouted. "We gave up 3 years of our lives for you." "No one asked you to," I replied. The steadiness of my own voice surprised me. "You moved in because Daniel lost his job and could not afford rent. I gave you a home. That was generosity, not a debt." "This cannot be legal," Daniel said, his hands trembling as he stared at the paper. "You cannot just cut us off from our inheritance." "It is not your inheritance yet," I said, lifting my water glass and taking a slow, deliberate sip. "And after tonight, I am giving very serious thought to what I leave behind, and to whom." Daniel's expression cycled through emotions too quickly to count. Shock, fury, fear, calculation. Finally, he crushed the document in his fist and slammed it onto the table. "This is not over," he said through clenched teeth. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." He stormed toward the front door, Melissa right behind him, already pulling out her phone as if preparing for battle. Claire hesitated, glancing between her parents and me, then followed them with obvious reluctance. Ethan stayed seated. "Grandpa?" he asked softly. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "It is all right, son. Go upstairs. This is not something you need to worry about." After he left, I stood alone in my dining room. The turkey had gone cold. The side dishes sat untouched. Wine glasses remained half full, forgotten. The crumpled trust document lay on the table like evidence of a crime that was only beginning to unfold. My hands did not shake as I picked up my plate and carried it into the kitchen. For 3 years they had lived under my roof, and I had convinced myself I was helping them recover. I told myself Daniel's growing demands were temporary stress. I told myself Melissa's entitlement was just her way of coping with disappointment. But as I loaded dishes into the dishwasher, standing alone in the quiet kitchen, I admitted the truth to myself. I had known for months, maybe longer. I had simply chosen not to face it until tonight. The real question was what I was going to do next. December 26th arrived wrapped in that strange, heavy silence that always follows a family blow-up. Daniel and Melissa stayed upstairs in their bedroom all morning with the door shut tight. Every so often, their voices rose in sharp bursts, angry and hushed at the same time, never quite loud enough for me to make out specific words. Claire had left before sunrise to stay with a friend, slipping out without saying goodbye. Only Ethan came downstairs. I was in my basement workshop, sitting at my workbench and carefully examining a pocket watch from 1892, when he appeared quietly in the doorway. "Can I help?" he asked, his voice cautious, like he was afraid of interrupting something fragile. "Always," I said, nodding toward the stool beside me. "Hand me the magnifying glass." He did, and we settled into a comfortable silence. We had worked like this dozens of times over the past 3 years. Ethan had inherited my patience with small mechanical things, along with an appreciation for the satisfying precision of gears fitting together just right. Unlike his father, he did not feel compelled to fill every quiet moment with noise. After a while, he spoke again. "Grandpa," he said slowly, "I heard Dad on the phone last night after you went to bed." I kept my eyes on the tiny watch mechanism in front of me, but my focus sharpened instantly. "Yeah?" I said. "He was talking to someone about documents," Ethan continued, "about your name being on things." His hands twisted together in his lap. "He said something about signatures," he added, barely above a whisper, "and how nobody would know the difference." The small brass gear I was holding slipped from the tweezers and clinked softly onto the workbench. I set my tools down carefully, forcing myself to move slowly and deliberately. "What else did you hear?" I asked. "He got angry when the other person said it would not work," Ethan said. "Then he said—" His voice dropped even lower. "He said they would find another way and that you would regret embarrassing them." I finally looked at him then, really looked at him. Fear and confusion were written plainly across his young face, and something cold and heavy settled deep in my chest. Daniel was not going to let this go. The living trust had been a defensive step, but it was becoming clear that I had badly underestimated how far my own son might be willing to go. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. "That took courage." "Are we in trouble?" Ethan asked. "No," I said firmly. "You are not in trouble. None of this is your fault." Even as I said it, I was beginning to understand that I might be in far more danger than I had initially realized. The call came the next afternoon, December 27th, while I was sitting in my study reviewing bank statements. The caller identification read, First National Bank. "Mr. Turner," a woman said when I answered. "This is Denise Wallace from our Loan Services Department. I am calling about an application we received for a home equity line of credit. The paperwork shows a request for $45,000 against your property at 1847 Timber Ridge Road." My blood ran cold. "I did not submit any application," I said. There was a brief pause on the line. "The application is dated December 15th, sir," she replied. "It includes your signature, or what appears to be your signature. We are required to verify all requests by phone before moving forward." "That is not my signature," I said flatly. "I want that application canceled immediately, and I want a full copy sent to me." Another pause followed, longer this time. "Mr. Turner, if you are alleging fraud—" "I am not alleging anything," I interrupted. "I am stating it. Someone forged my signature. I want documentation of this attempt." After the call ended, I sat staring at the calendar on my desk. December 15th, 9 days before I had filed the trust. 9 days before the confrontation at Christmas dinner. Daniel had tried to borrow against my house before I had protected it. And when I had mentioned feeling uneasy about some recent mail deliveries, he had calmly assured me everything was fine, telling me he had been helping by organizing my paperwork. I had thought he was being considerate. He had been covering his tracks. I opened my filing cabinet and began sorting through my financial records with the same methodical focus that had made me successful in my career. Credit card statements, bank records, retirement account summaries. With each page, new questions surfaced, new inconsistencies. 3 credit cards I did not remember opening, all linked to my address, all carrying balances near their limits. The total came to $67,300. The charges included luxury handbags, high-end electronics, and a week-long trip to Miami that I had never taken. Then I found the withdrawal, a transfer from my retirement account dated August of 2023, $34,000. The memo line read, "Emergency family medical expenses." There had been no emergency, no hospital stays, no crisis, just money that vanished. I remembered asking Daniel about our finances that fall, how he had smiled and told me everything was under control. I leaned back in my chair, the documents spread across my desk like evidence at a crime scene. For 3 years, they had been draining me, slowly, quietly, and I had either trusted too easily or chosen not to see what was right in front of me. My thoughts drifted back to the summer of 2021, when Daniel had called to say he had been laid off from the dealership. Restructuring, he had told me, nothing I could do. I had believed him without hesitation. I had offered them a place to stay that same day because that is what fathers do. That is what family is supposed to do. I remembered helping them move in that September. I remembered the way Melissa had looked around my house with barely hidden disappointment. I remembered Daniel joking about slumming it in his father's old place. At the time, I had laughed along. Now, sitting alone in my study, I understood how long the lie had really been growing. I had laughed it off at the time. I told myself they were under pressure. They had lost their income, their apartment, and their sense of independence all at once. A little bitterness, a little resentment, that seemed understandable. That was the story I chose to believe. But now, other moments came back to me with uncomfortable clarity. Daniel asking to borrow my credit card for groceries and returning it hours later with a casual thank you. Melissa offering unprompted to help organize my financial paperwork. Mail that never seemed to arrive. Bank statements I could not remember opening or reviewing. Every single time I questioned something, Daniel had an explanation ready. And every time doubt crept in, I pushed it away. He was my son. I had raised him to be honest. I wanted to believe that no matter how badly he struggled or how many mistakes he made, he would never steal from his own father. I had been wrong. The anger did not hit all at once. It rose slowly, steadily, like water building behind a dam. It was not the loud, explosive fury Daniel had unleashed at the Christmas table. This was colder, sharper, more controlled, the kind of anger that comes when you realize someone you loved played you for a fool. I replayed the moment he had stood over me at dinner, his voice dripping with moral outrage as he demanded $100,000. The nerve of it was staggering. He had already taken more than that through fraud and identity theft, and he still felt entitled to demand more while threatening to erase me from my grandchildren's lives. My phone vibrated on the desk. A text from an unfamiliar number read, "We need to talk. This is not over. D." I deleted the message without responding. Then I opened my laptop and began searching for attorneys. Not just any attorneys. I looked for specialists, estate lawyers, financial fraud experts, criminal defense attorneys who dealt with complex white-collar cases. Ethan's warning about his father's phone call had clarified something important for me. This was no longer just about protecting myself. This was about pushing back. By December 29th, I was sitting in an office in Stamford, a thick folder spread open on a polished conference table. The name on the door read, Richard Harris. Richard was 52, with silver-streaked hair and a calm, steady presence that comes from decades of dealing with other people's worst moments. He reviewed the documents in silence, flipping through credit card statements, bank records, and the forged loan application with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Turner," he said finally, looking up at me, "do you understand what you are dealing with here?" "Identity theft, fraud, forgery," I replied evenly. "Enough for criminal charges?" "Yes," he said, tapping the loan paperwork. "Several felony counts, actually. Connecticut treats financial exploitation of older family members very seriously. If we pursue this through the criminal system, your son and daughter-in-law could be facing significant prison time." "I do not want that," I said immediately. Richard raised his eyebrows slightly. "Then what do you want?" I thought about Daniel's threats, about Melissa's open contempt, about the way they had planned their Christmas ambush so confidently, convinced I would cave under guilt or fear. I thought about 3 years of lies, manipulation, and stolen trust. "I want my money back," I said, "every dollar, and I want them to understand there are consequences even without criminal prosecution." Richard leaned back in his chair. "That is possible," he said, "but it will require a more strategic approach." "I am listening," I replied. We spent the next 3 hours mapping out a plan, document everything, lock down every account, file fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus, report the forged loan application to the bank immediately, preserve evidence, but hold off for now on filing criminal complaints. "The objective," Richard explained, "is leverage. We create a legal environment where cooperation is the least painful option. If they refuse to repay you, the alternative becomes far worse." By December 31st, I was back in my study, alone, a spreadsheet open on my laptop. It laid everything out in stark, undeniable numbers. $67,300 in fraudulent credit card charges, $34,000 withdrawn from my retirement account, $45,000 attempted through a home equity line of credit, $146,300. That was how much they had tried to take from me, and how close they had come to succeeding. Outside my window, Fairfield was preparing for New Year's Eve. By midnight, fireworks would explode over the sound. People would raise glasses and toast to fresh starts, clean slates, and better futures. I stared at the neat columns of numbers on my screen and felt something settle inside me. It was not peace. It was not forgiveness. It was clarity. Daniel had told me I had to choose between giving them money or losing my family. He had been wrong. I was not choosing anything. I was reclaiming control. My fingers moved across the keyboard as I updated a document I had started days earlier. It was no longer just notes. It was a structured plan, recovery, accountability, justice, a step-by-step outline designed by someone who had spent 38 years learning how to spot fraud, pressure tactics, and hidden risks in high-stakes transactions. They had mistaken me for a helpless old man with equity and retirement savings. They thought guilt, fear, or loneliness would break me. They had miscalculated badly. I closed my laptop and glanced at the pocket watch resting on my desk, its back removed, gears and springs exposed under the lamp. Every component was visible, every problem diagnosable. Broken things could be repaired if you understood how they worked, if you were patient enough to realign each piece carefully. My family was broken. It had been broken for a long time, and now, finally, I knew exactly where to begin. Maybe the damage had started long before Daniel moved into my house, maybe even before he lost his job. Either way, I was finished pretending it could be repaired by acting like nothing was wrong. The clock in the hallway struck 11, its chime echoing softly through the house. 1 hour until midnight. 1 hour until the calendar turned to 2025. I picked up my phone and opened my notes application. At the top of a blank page, I typed January objectives. Underneath, I began listing exactly what needed to happen next. They wanted $100,000. Fine. Then they were going to return every single dollar they had already stolen from me, whether they agreed willingly or not. Taylor Bishop arrived at my house on January 2nd, wearing a navy suit that had clearly lived a long life and carrying a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived more than one professional war. According to Richard's recommendation, Taylor was 44 years old, a former forensic auditor who had walked away from corporate investigations after growing tired of shielding companies that did not deserve protection. "Mr. Turner," he said, shaking my hand with a firm grip, the kind learned by someone who understood how to project confidence. Richard Harris forwarded the preliminary materials. I have reviewed the credit card activity and the retirement account withdrawal. We sat in my study with the door closed, sealing out any curious ears upstairs. I could faintly hear Melissa's voice drifting down from the second floor, cheerful and artificial, the tone she used whenever she wanted something from someone. "What I need," I said, spreading the documents across my desk, "is a complete picture. Every transaction, every forged signature, every lie they used to access my money." Taylor opened his laptop and set a digital recorder on the desk. "Start at the beginning. When did they move in?" "September of 2021, I said. Daniel had just lost his job at the dealership. He said it was restructuring, but I later learned there were financial irregularities in his department." I paused, remembering how quickly I had cleared out the spare rooms, how sincerely I had told them to stay as long as they needed. "I thought I was doing the right thing," I added. "I thought I was being a good father." "You were being a trusting father," Taylor replied calmly. "There is a difference, and it is not your fault they took advantage of it." Over the next hour, I walked him through everything. The mail that started disappearing in early 2022. The times Daniel insisted on helping me organize financial paperwork. The credit cards I never applied for, but that somehow existed in my name. The retirement account withdrawal Daniel had explained away as emergency family medical expenses, despite there being no emergency and no medical crisis of any kind. Taylor's fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard as he built timelines and spreadsheets with the practiced ease of someone who had done this countless times. "I will need records from the county clerk's office," he said. "If they attempted to file any property-related documents, there will be a trail, even if the filings were rejected." "How long?" I asked. "For county records, 2 to 3 days. For the financial analysis," he said, glancing at his screen, "I can give you preliminary findings by January 5th. That gave me 3 days. 3 days to observe, 3 days to watch Daniel and Melissa with clear eyes, 3 days to let them believe they had escaped consequences. Once I started paying attention, it was astonishing how obvious the signs became. On January 3rd, I came upstairs from my workshop and found Melissa stretched out on the couch, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. She was so absorbed in images of stone countertops and spa-style bathrooms that she did not notice me at first. When she finally looked up and saw me, she quickly switched applications, but not before I caught the price of the house she had been admiring, $985,000. Just daydreaming, she said with a tight smile, looking at what we could have had if you had been more supportive. I nodded slowly, watching her jaw tense around the word supportive, the word she used to mean unquestioning compliance and a six-figure handout. That is a nice kitchen, I said mildly, shame about the market. Her eyes narrowed as she tried to decide whether I was mocking her. I kept my expression neutral, attentive. After a moment, she relaxed. The market will correct itself, she said confidently. It always does, and when it does, we will be ready. With my money, she meant, with the equity in my house, with whatever remained of my retirement savings, with anything else they could extract before I inconveniently lived too long. I went into the kitchen to make coffee. Through the doorway, I watched her return to her phone, fingers flying as she typed out messages, almost certainly to Daniel, coordinating their next move now that the Christmas dinner ambush had failed. The coffee maker sputtered and hissed, filling the room with a rich smell of fresh grounds. I thought about how Melissa had started bringing me coffee every morning about 6 months earlier. She had framed it as a thoughtful gesture, carrying it into my study with a smile. I had been touched. Now I wondered what she had been doing in my study during those mornings, what paperwork she had photographed, what mail she had handled, what signatures she might have practiced while I sat there drinking her coffee. That evening, I sat at the dinner table and watched them perform the familiar play of normalcy. Daniel acted distracted. Melissa was overly pleasant. Claire picked at her food in resentful silence, still angry about being pulled away from her friend's house to participate in family dinners she no longer wanted to attend. They thought the storm had passed. They had no idea it was just beginning. Ethan ate quietly, barely touching his food, glancing at me now and then with worried eyes. Daniel, on the other hand, talked easily about an upcoming job interview, his tone smooth and confident, the same polished voice he had used for 3 years to explain away every missing statement and every suspicious transaction. "It is a sales role with a pharmaceutical company," he said, cutting his chicken into neat pieces. "Base salary plus commission. If I hit my numbers, I could be clearing 6 figures. Melissa beamed at him, as if the words themselves were proof of redemption. "That is fantastic, honey. See, things are finally turning around." I nodded and offered the appropriate murmurs of encouragement while quietly running the numbers in my head. If Daniel actually got the job, if he started in February, if he performed well, if the commission structure was not exaggerated, then by summer they might be able to afford rent somewhere. They might finally leave my house and take their schemes, their lies, and their forged signatures with them. But they would not. They had already taken more than $100,000 from me. Walking away now would mean giving up access to whatever they still believed they could squeeze out of me. "That sounds promising," I said evenly. "I hope it works out." For a fraction of a second, Daniel's smile flickered, just a brief crack before it reset. He had expected more enthusiasm, maybe relief at the idea of them becoming financially independent. He had no idea that I was tracking every word, counting every lie, and building a case that would make it impossible for them to disappear without consequences. On January 5th, Taylor Bishop sent me an encrypted email with 3 attachments. I locked the door to my study and opened them slowly, my reading glasses perched low on my nose as I worked through page after page of documented theft. The first attachment detailed the credit card fraud. 3 cards opened between March of 2022 and November of 2023, all using my Social Security number and forged signatures. Total charges, $67,300. Taylor had categorized every purchase: luxury items, electronics, airfare, hotels, restaurants. He had even included screenshots from Melissa's social media accounts. There she was, smiling with a Gucci handbag on her arm. There she was again, posting from Miami on dates that perfectly matched the travel charges on my fraudulent cards. The second attachment covered attempted property transfers. 2 quitclaim deeds filed with the county clerk's office in 2023. Both attempts to add Daniel's name to my property title. Both had been rejected. The first because the notary seal raised red flags. The second because the house had already been placed into the living trust by the time they tried again. The third attachment detailed the retirement account withdrawal. $34,000 taken in August of 2023, authorized using a power of attorney document I had never signed. Taylor had obtained the bank's original paperwork. The signature was close, but not close enough. Someone had traced my name from another document, likely one of my old appraisal reports, but they had gotten the pressure wrong. The angle of my cursive capital R was slightly off. I leaned back in my chair, the document spread across my desk like exhibits at a trial. That was exactly what this was. Not a courtroom trial, not yet, but a test of resolve. A moment where I had to decide whether I would let them walk away with what they had done or whether I would finally push back. My phone vibrated. A message from Richard Harris read, "Received Bishop's report. Call me when you are ready to proceed." I did not hesitate. "I am ready," I said when he answered. "File the fraud reports with all 3 credit card companies. Submit the complaint to the bank regarding the forged power of attorney, and send Daniel and Melissa formal notice that everything is being documented." "That will escalate the situation," Richard cautioned. "They will know you are taking action." "Good," I replied. "Let them know. Let them spend the next few days wondering exactly how much trouble they are in." I heard a note of approval in his voice. "I will have everything filed by tomorrow morning. With this level of documentation, the credit card companies usually respond within 72 hours. On January 8th, the fraud reports were submitted through Richard's office. By January 10th, I received confirmation that all 3 credit card companies had opened formal investigations. By January 12th, letters arrived at my house. I was in my workshop when I heard Melissa scream from upstairs. It was not fear. It was pure rage. The sound of someone realizing their carefully constructed plan had just collapsed. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. The workshop door flew open, and Daniel stood there, his face flushed, a letter shaking in his clenched hand. "You did this!" he shouted, thrusting the paper toward me. "The credit card companies are demanding immediate repayment of $67,300. They shut everything down. They froze the accounts." I set the pocket watch on my workbench and looked at him calmly. "I reported identity theft," I said, "because someone used my Social Security number to open credit cards without my permission." "You knew about those cards," he snapped. "I knew about fraud committed in my name," I replied evenly. "I know that someone forged my signature, opened accounts illegally, and spent tens of thousands of dollars on luxury items and vacations I never took," I continued evenly. "And now the banks know it too." Melissa stepped into the doorway behind Daniel, her face twisted with pure fury. "You are destroying us," she snapped. "We are your family." "Family does not steal," I said quietly. "Family does not forge signatures or commit identity theft. The credit card companies have given you 30 days to pay the full balance. If you do not, they will turn this over to collections and pursue fraud charges." "We do not have $67,000, Daniel said, his voice cracking. "You know we do not have that kind of money." I held his gaze. "Then you should not have spent it." After that, the house turned into a silent battleground. Daniel and Melissa stopped speaking to me entirely, except for clipped demands or bitter accusations thrown from the top of the stairs. They stayed shut away in their bedroom, their voices rising and falling in arguments I could not quite hear, but did not need to. Claire disappeared to her friend's house for days at a time, barely checking in. Only Ethan still came to see me. He slipped into my workshop late at night now, after his parents had gone to bed, moving quietly, like he did not want to be noticed. "They are scared," he told me on January 14th, watching as I carefully calibrated the springs on a watch from 1903. "I heard Mom crying. She said they are going to lose everything." "They already lost it," I said gently. "They spent money that was not theirs. Now they have to deal with the consequences." "Are you going to make them go to jail?" he asked. I looked at my grandson, at his worried 14-year-old face, and felt a sharp pang in my chest. Not guilt over what I was doing to Daniel and Melissa, but grief over what my son's choices were doing to his children. "I do not want anyone to go to jail," I said honestly, "but I do want justice. Those are not the same thing." On January 16th, I learned that Daniel and Melissa had hired a lawyer, not someone of Richard's caliber. This was an attorney they had found through a friend of a friend, the kind who advertised on bus benches and took cases more reputable lawyers avoided. I found out because their lawyer called Richard's office, and Richard immediately called me. "They are claiming you gave verbal permission for the credit cards," Richard said, his tone making it clear how absurd he found the argument. "Their attorney wants to schedule a meeting to discuss a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" I asked. "They want you to sign a statement saying you authorized the cards. In exchange, they would agree to repay you in installments over 5 years. I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "So they want me to commit perjury to protect them from fraud charges, and in return, they might pay me back $67,000 over 5 years with no interest and no guarantees." That is essentially their proposal. "Tell them no," I said, "and tell them that if they want to continue this conversation, it happens in a formal meeting with all parties present." That meeting took place on January 23rd. They chose a coffee shop in Fairfield, neutral ground, probably hoping the public setting would keep things restrained. Daniel and Melissa arrived with their attorney, a sweating man in his 50s named Marcus Webb, who kept wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. I brought Richard, who sat beside me with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly where the leverage lay. What I had not expected was the notary. She looked young, maybe 25, and she kept glancing nervously at Melissa, like someone who had been told this would be quick and painless. A notary's stamp sat on the table in front of her. A digital recorder peeked out of her purse. Richard noticed it at the same moment I did. His hand touched my arm lightly, a silent warning. "Mr. Turner," Marcus Webb began, his voice slick with forced friendliness, "we are here today to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding. My clients believe there was a verbal agreement regarding the financial assistance they provided you over the past 3 years." "Assistance they provided me?" I interrupted. I would love to hear what assistance that was. Webb's smile tightened. "They lived with you, helped maintain your property, provided companionship. They lived in my house rent-free while stealing my identity and forging my signature," I said calmly. "Those are not the same thing." Melissa leaned forward, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Dad, please, we are trying to fix this. We just need you to confirm that you knew about the credit cards, that you were okay with us using them for family expenses." The notary's hand moved toward her purse. Richard stood up immediately. "This meeting is over," he said firmly. "Mr. Turner, will not be making any statements, recorded or otherwise, without full legal review." Then he looked directly at the notary. "And for the record, any attempt to record this conversation without explicit consent from all parties is illegal in Connecticut. So is notarizing a statement obtained under false pretenses." The color drained from the notary's face. She grabbed her stamp and her purse and fled the coffee shop so fast she nearly knocked over a chair. Webb stammered, "We are just trying to resolve this amicably." "No," Richard said flatly. "You are trying to coerce my client into providing a false statement to shield your clients from fraud charges. That is not going to happen." "If your clients want to discuss real repayment," Richard said evenly, "they can do so through the appropriate legal channels. Otherwise, this conversation is finished." We stood and walked out, leaving them frozen at the small cafe table. Melissa's carefully applied makeup had started to streak as real tears broke through. Daniel sat rigid, his face tight, with barely contained fury, his jaw clenched as if grinding down anger by force alone. In Richard's car on the drive back to his office, I broke the silence. "They are getting desperate." Richard glanced over briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "Good. Desperate people make mistakes." He paused, then asked, "How far are you willing to push this?" I thought about the $146,300 they had tried to take from me, about the years of deception, about Ethan's worried eyes and Claire's simmering resentment, about how my home, once quiet and safe, had turned into a battleground. "As far as it takes," I said. On February 1st, the credit card companies issued their formal demand letters. Daniel and Melissa were given until February 28th to repay the full $67,300 or face collections and criminal fraud proceedings. That same day, I learned something else. The bank financing their so-called dream house had rejected their loan application. Their credit scores had collapsed under the weight of the fraud investigations, and no lender was willing to touch them. The property on Lakeview Drive was officially out of reach. I did not hear it from a bank. I heard it through the heating vents. One evening, while I worked quietly in my basement workshop, Melissa's voice drifted down from upstairs as she spoke on the phone, sharp and trembling. "The bank said our credit is destroyed," she said. "We cannot get approved for anything. That house is gone. Everything we worked for is gone, and it is all because Robert decided to be vindictive." I allowed myself a small, humorless smile in the shadows. Vindictive. That was what she called accountability for theft and fraud. On February 7th, Richard called again, his tone measured but interested. "The retirement account withdrawal," he said. "I reviewed the power of attorney they used. It is absolutely forged. The bank has admitted their verification process failed." "So what happens now?" I asked. "We can sue for recovery," he said, "but that will take months, possibly longer." "What is the alternative?" "We pressure them directly," Richard replied. "A promissory note, a formal repayment agreement with strict terms, penalties for missed payments, and immediate legal consequences if they default." "Is it enforceable?" "If they sign it," he said, "completely. And given where they are right now, they may not have a choice." 3 days later, on February 10th, I had Richard prepare 2 additional documents. The first was a formal notice of rent, $1,800 per month, the fair market rate for a 4-bedroom home in Fairfield. The second was a notice to vacate, giving them 60 days to leave if rent was not paid. Both were sent by certified mail. That evening, Daniel came to my study without knocking. He pushed the door open and stood there, holding the envelopes in his hand, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and rage. "Rent?" he said quietly. The softness in his voice was more unsettling than shouting. You are charging your own son rent? I am charging the people who stole over $100,000 from me, I replied calmly, for continued occupancy of my property. That is insane, he said. No, I answered. It is fair. We are your family. Then you should have acted like it. He stepped closer. For a moment I genuinely thought he might strike me. His fists were clenched. His breathing was fast and uneven. The charming facade he used so well was gone, replaced by raw entitlement and anger. But he did not hit me. Instead, he said, "You will regret this. When Melissa and I get back on our feet, when we are successful again, you will regret how you treated us. And when that happens, do not expect help. Do not expect to see your grandchildren. Do not expect anything from us." I looked at him steadily. "I already expect nothing from you, Daniel," I said quietly. "That is the difference between us. You believed my money belonged to you. I finally understand that my trust was mine to give, and you destroyed it." He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the framed appraisal certificates lining my wall. I stayed in my study long after he left, listening to the old house settle around me, thinking about the road I had chosen. There was still time to back down, to forgive the debt, to let them stay rent-free and pretend the last 3 years had never happened. But that was exactly what I had been doing for 3 years, pretending, ignoring, trusting, when I should have been verifying. My phone buzzed with an email from Taylor Bishop. Subject: Additional findings. Timeline of attempted property transfer. I opened it and read through his meticulous analysis, the dates, the forged documents, the deliberate planning behind every failed attempt to take my house out from under me. And in that moment, everything became clear. I knew exactly how to make them pay, not just with money, though they would pay that too, but with the future they had imagined for themselves, the house they planned to buy with my equity, the comfortable life they thought they could build on the foundation of my trust. I opened a new document on my computer and began typing. It was time to show them what real consequences looked like. The certified mail arrived at their door on February 11th. I watched from the window of my study as Melissa signed for the certified envelope. Her fingers smudged the electronic pad the postal worker held out to her. She turned the thick package over once, then twice, and when she saw Richard Harris's law firm listed on the return label, her expression tightened instantly. She did not open it outside. Instead, she pressed it to her chest and hurried back into the house, calling out for Daniel as she went. I counted to 30. Right on schedule, raised voices erupted upstairs. I could not make out the words, but I did not need to. The contents were straightforward enough. A formal demand for rent at $1,800 per month starting March 1st, or vacate the property within 30 days. By 67, I had learned something most people never do. Patience is a weapon, and it cuts deepest when the other side forgets it exists. February 18th brought Daniel to my study. He did not knock. He shoved the door open hard enough to make the hinges groan. His face was flushed, veins standing out at his temples, the kind of fury that comes from realizing a carefully constructed plan has failed. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and edged with threat. I set aside the tiny brass gear I had been examining, part of a pocket watch from 1924, and looked at him calmly. "About the rent?" I asked. "It is well within market value for a 4-bedroom house in Fairfield." "You know exactly what this is about," he snapped, stepping closer to my desk. "You are trying to ruin us. Fine. But you will never see your grandchildren again, ever. We will move to California, Florida, anywhere you cannot reach them. You will die alone without knowing them." I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds, then 10. His breathing was fast and uneven, his shoulders rigid like a boxer waiting for a bell. "Is that a threat, Daniel?" I asked evenly. "It is a promise." I picked up my phone, tapped the screen, and set it face up on the desk between us. "I am recording now," I said. "Would you mind repeating that for the record? You are threatening to deny me access to my grandchildren because I am asking you to pay fair market rent for my property?" His eyes flicked to the phone, then back to my face. Something shifted in his expression. The rage drained just enough for calculation to take its place. "This conversation is over," he said abruptly, backing toward the door. "But do not think you have won. We will find a way out of this." After he left, I sent the recording to Richard with a single line of text. "Please add this to the file." His reply came within minutes. "Documented. This significantly strengthens our position if they attempt any custody or visitation leverage." On February 24th, Richard sent the next formal notice: 30 days to vacate or begin paying rent at $1,800 per month. Attached was a separate invoice for $34,000, the amount taken from my retirement account, along with a proposed repayment plan. I did not expect acceptance. I expected panic. They exceeded expectations. On February 27th, I returned from the hardware store to find Melissa sitting in my living room. Rental applications were spread across the coffee table like discarded test papers. She looked up when I walked in, her makeup flawless despite red-rimmed eyes. "We are trying," she said, her voice brittle. "We applied to 6 places, but our credit—" She trailed off, staring down at the papers as if they were proof of crime she refused to acknowledge. "Your credit is damaged because you committed fraud," I said quietly. "That does not disappear just because you submit applications." "We made mistakes," she shot back, her voice rising, "but we are family. Claire and Ethan need stability, and you are throwing us out." "I am offering you a way to stay," I replied. $1,800 a month. That is the agreement." "We do not have that kind of money." "Then I suggest you both secure employment," I said calmly. She stood abruptly, gathering the applications with trembling hands. "You have changed," she said sharply. "The man I knew 3 years ago would never have been this cold." "The man you knew 3 years ago did not know his son and daughter-in-law were stealing from him," I said. "People change when they learn the truth." March 1st arrived. No rent payment, no discussion, no acknowledgement. On March 5th, I was sitting at Miller's Coffee House on Post Road, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper, enjoying the rare quiet, when someone said my name. "Robert? Robert Turner?" I looked up to see Gregory Holmes approaching with a wide smile. Greg was 61, silver-haired, and carried the easy confidence of someone who had spent decades in real estate development. We had worked together on property valuations in the early 2000s before he transitioned into project management. "Greg," I said, standing to shake his hand, "how long has it been?" 2 years at least," he replied. "Mind if I sit?" We spent 20 minutes catching up. His work at Precision Home Development, my retirement, the state of the Fairfield County market, ordinary conversation between old colleagues. Then he said something that made my coffee pause halfway to my lips. "We have a luxury development in Greenwich that has been sitting for months," Greg said, stirring his cup. "Beautiful property on Lakeview Avenue, but we cannot move it. Market is soft at that price point." "Lakeview Avenue?" I repeated carefully. "Yeah, 234 Lakeview. Ring a bell?" It did. The address was etched into my memory from Christmas dinner, from Daniel's demands, from Melissa's desperate scrolling and whispered phone calls. "I have heard of it," I said evenly. "What is the problem?" Greg shrugged. "We think the initial appraisal was optimistic. listed at 1.34 million, but we are not getting serious offers. I set my cup down slowly, and in that moment, the final piece of the puzzle slid perfectly into place. I have been pushing management to bring in an independent evaluator, Greg continued, someone to give us a realistic assessment. I took a slow sip of coffee, using the moment to steady my expression while my thoughts raced ahead. "What kind of evaluator are you looking for?" I asked. Greg leaned back in his chair. "Someone with your background, luxury residential properties, market analysis, honest valuations. Would you be interested in some consulting work? We need someone who is not afraid to tell us when a price is unrealistic." I almost laughed at the timing. The universe, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. "I might be," I said carefully. "What does the compensation look like?" $8,500 a month, he replied. "About 15 hours of work, flexible schedule, mostly property reviews and market reports." I pretended to think it over, even though the decision had already been made. "Send me the details," I said. "I will review them." We finished our coffee talking about old projects, mutual acquaintances, and how the industry had shifted over the years. When we parted in the parking lot, Greg handed me his business card. "I am really glad we ran into each other, Robert," he said. "We need professionals who are not yes men." I slipped the card into my pocket and drove home, my mind already mapping out the implications. The house Daniel and Melissa had demanded $100,000 to buy was owned by a company that now wanted me to evaluate whether it was overpriced. The symmetry was almost poetic. March 12th brought official paperwork from Precision Home Development, an employment contract, a non-disclosure agreement, a list of active projects. I reviewed everything in Richard's office, with him scrutinizing every clause to ensure there were no legal conflicts. "This is legitimate consulting work," Richard said finally. "You are providing professional real estate analysis. The fact that one of the properties intersects with your personal situation is incidental." "Entirely incidental," I agreed, though we both understood how thin that word really was. That evening, I sat in my study reviewing the project files Greg had sent. Third on the list was an address I knew all too well. 234 Lakeview Avenue, Greenwich, Connecticut. Luxury new construction, 5 bedrooms, listed at $1,340,000. My task was simple: provide an independent market valuation. I pulled recent comparable sales, examined pricing trends, and reviewed absorption rates. The process was familiar and methodical, the same work I had done thousands of times over my career, but this time every figure carried extra weight. My preliminary conclusion was clear: the property was overpriced by at least 15%. Upstairs, Melissa's voice drifted through the heating vents. She was on the phone again, desperation obvious in her tone. "We just need 3 months to get back on our feet," she pleaded. "Can you talk to your parents about a loan?" Whoever was on the other end apparently said no. On March 20th, Daniel officially started work as a sales representative for a pharmaceutical supply company. His base pay was $3,400 a month, with commissions that might never materialize. Melissa took a retail job in Stamford, 40 hours a week for $2,800 a month. Together, their gross income was $6,200. After taxes, closer to $4,800. It was not enough. They were drowning. That same day, a letter arrived from First National Bank. The fraudulent credit card debt had been transferred to Consolidated Credit Recovery. The $67,300 was now officially in collections. Their already damaged credit was about to be annihilated. I knew because Daniel left the letter on the kitchen counter. His handwriting scrawled across the top read, "Call them Monday. Try to negotiate." Good luck negotiating when you are already underwater, I thought. March 26th marked the deadline. 30 days since the eviction notice. 30 days to either pay rent or leave. They requested a meeting. Richard sat at my dining room table with me, across from Daniel and Melissa, as if we were negotiating a corporate merger instead of the terms of their continued residence in my home. Daniel spoke first, his voice carefully controlled. "We both have jobs now," he said. "We can start making payments." "How much?" Richard asked, pen poised above his legal pad. $1,200 a month, Melissa said quickly. "That is what we can manage right now. Once Daniel's commissions kick in—" "The rent is $1,800, I interrupted. "That is not negotiable." "We cannot," Daniel began. "Then you have 14 days to vacate," I said calmly. Melissa's composure shattered. "Where are we supposed to go?" she demanded. "No one will rent to us with our credit. You are backing us into a corner." "You backed yourselves into a corner when you stole from me," I replied evenly. "I am offering a solution. Pay what you owe or move out." Richard slid another document across the table. "There is also the matter of the $34,000 taken from Mr. Turner's retirement account," he said. "We are proposing a promissory note, monthly payments of $600, in addition to the $1,800 in rent. Total monthly obligation, $2,400. I watched Daniel's face as he did the math. I watched the color drain from his cheeks. I watched his jaw tighten until the muscle jumped beneath his skin, his hands curling into fists against the table. $2,400 a month, he repeated softly, his voice hollow. "You know that is almost impossible," Daniel said hoarsely. "Then make it possible," I replied without raising my voice. "Or file for bankruptcy and move out. Those are your choices." Melissa looked like she might throw something. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms, leaving red half-moons in her skin. Her breathing was fast and shallow, the kind that comes right before a breakdown, but instead of screaming, she turned sharply toward Daniel. "Sign it," she said. "Melissa, sign it," she repeated, her voice tight and unforgiving. "We have nowhere else to go." Daniel reached for the pen, his hand trembling. I had seen that shake before, in people who suddenly understood they had lost control of everything they thought they owned. He dragged the pen across the page, signing the promissory note, each stroke slow and heavy, like a public admission of defeat. When he finished, he looked at me. What was in his eyes was not quite hatred, but it was close enough to feel cold. "You are enjoying this," he said flatly. "I am making sure you face consequences for what you did," I replied. "If that brings a sense of satisfaction, it is because justice is supposed to feel that way." They stood and left the table without another word. I heard their footsteps thud up the stairs, followed by the sharp slam of their bedroom door, hard enough to rattle the window panes. Richard gathered the signed documents, sliding them neatly into his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who had handled hundreds of similar situations. "First payment is due April 1st, he said, "if they miss it." "I know," I said. "Eviction proceedings start immediately." After Richard left, I went downstairs to my workshop. Ethan was already there, sitting on his usual stool, hands folded neatly in his lap. "I heard," he said quietly. $2,400. "They made their choices," I replied, picking up the tools I had left scattered on my workbench. "Now they live with them." "What happens if they cannot pay?" he asked. "Then they leave," I said, selecting a tiny screwdriver and returning to the watch mechanism I had been restoring for weeks. "And they learn that stealing has consequences." Ethan watched me work in silence for a while. Then he asked, "Grandpa, what are you building toward?" I looked at him, at his serious 14-year-old face, and saw the same quiet intelligence I had recognized in myself at that age. He noticed patterns. He understood cause and effect. Justice, I said simply. I am building toward justice. On March 28th, my first consulting payment from Precision Home Development hit my account. $8,500. I deposited it and sat in my study reviewing the project list Greg had sent. Tomorrow, I would begin the formal evaluation of 234 Lakeview Avenue, the house Daniel and Melissa had demanded I finance, the dream they had threatened, manipulated, and lied to obtain. I opened a new document and began typing my preliminary market analysis notes. The work was professional and methodical, grounded entirely in comparable sales, absorption rates, and current market conditions. Still, I would be lying if I said there was no satisfaction in knowing that my professional judgment was about to play a role in dismantling the fantasy they had built on my money. Ethan's question echoed in my mind. What are you building toward? The answer was clear. I was building toward the moment when Daniel and Melissa would finally understand that every dollar they stole, every signature they forged, and every lie they told carried consequences far greater than they ever imagined. And I intended to ensure those consequences were thorough, lawful, and impossible to escape. The watch on my workbench ticked steadily, each gear meshing cleanly with the next. Broken things could be repaired if you understood how they worked. Stolen time could be reclaimed if you were patient enough to restore each piece carefully. Justice, I had learned, worked the same way. April 3rd arrived with a crisp spring morning, the kind that reminded me why Connecticut could be so beautiful. I drove to Precision Home Development's office in Greenwich, my briefcase filled with project files, my laptop loaded with market data. Greg met me in the conference room, coffee already waiting. "Robert, good to see you," he said. "Let us go over the new assignments." He spread a list of properties across the table: residential developments, luxury homes, mixed-use projects. My eyes landed naturally on the third item, 234 Lakeview Avenue, Greenwich. I kept my expression neutral. "This one has been sitting for a while," I observed. 4 months with no serious interest," Greg replied, tapping the file. "Management is nervous, listed at $1.34 million, but we are not convinced that is realistic. We need an honest assessment, not wishful thinking." I flipped through the specifications. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, high-end finishes throughout. The same house Daniel had demanded $100,000 to secure. The same house Melissa had labeled on social media as our future dream home. The irony was almost painful. "I can deliver a preliminary report by April 8th, I said. "Full analysis, comparable sales, market trends, realistic valuation." "That is exactly what we need," Greg said. "No one is going to question your numbers. You wrote the book on fair market valuation in Fairfield County." For the next 3 days, I did what I had done for 38 years. I evaluated property. And this time, every number told a story they could not escape. I drove out to Lakeview Avenue myself, walked the property slowly, measured rooms, inspected finishes, and took detailed notes. The construction was competent, but nothing extraordinary. The location was good, but it was not truly premium. When I compared it against recent sales of similar homes in Greenwich, the conclusion was unavoidable. The asking price was significantly inflated. My report was precise, factual, and impossible to argue with. Based on current market conditions and a comparative analysis of similar properties in Greenwich, the fair market value of 234 Lakeview Avenue is approximately $1,150,000. The current listing price of $1,340,000 represents a 19.6% premium over market value. I submitted the report on April 8th. By April 10th, Precision Home Development reduced the listing price to $1,150,000. On April 12th, the new price went public. That evening, I was in my workshop when I heard Melissa's voice upstairs, sharp with disbelief. "Daniel, come look at this." Heavy footsteps crossed the floor above me. I set my tools down and listened. "The house on Lakeview dropped to 1.15, she said, her voice echoing through the heating vents. "That's $190,000 less. If we had bought it when we wanted to, we could not have bought it then either," Daniel replied, his voice dull with exhaustion. "Our credit was already falling apart." "But still," she snapped, "we could have made it work. We could have done so much if your father had not sabotaged us." I allowed myself a small, private smile. They still did not know. They had no idea that their dream house belonged to the company that now employed me, or that I was the one who had evaluated it, or that my professional judgment had been the reason the price collapsed. Sometimes the most effective consequences were the ones people never even realized were happening. April 1st had brought their first payment, $2,400 delivered by check. Daniel's signature pressed so hard into the paper it nearly tore through. I deposited it without comment, fully aware of how painful that withdrawal had been for them. Their combined income was $6,200 a month before taxes. After deductions, closer to $4,800. Paying me $2,400 left them with the same amount for everything else: groceries, utilities, fuel, insurance, phones. They were living paycheck to paycheck now. The illusion of wealth they had built on stolen money evaporated almost overnight. I would see them occasionally in the kitchen. Melissa hunched over her phone, calculating bills. Daniel staring into space, hollow-eyed, finally understanding what consequences felt like. The expensive dinners were gone. The designer clothes disappeared from daily rotation, replaced with basic, discounted items. Melissa's social media accounts, once carefully curated displays of prosperity, went silent. On April 18th, raised voices erupted upstairs. Not Daniel and Melissa this time, but Melissa and Claire. "You lied to me," Claire shouted, her voice breaking. "Grandpa never gave you permission. These signatures are forged. Ethan showed me the documents." "Claire, sweetheart, you do not understand," Melissa said desperately. "I understand exactly," Claire fired back. "You stole from him. You used his identity to buy all your expensive things, and now you are acting like he is the villain. We are your parents. You should be on our side. I am on the side of people who do not commit fraud." A door slammed hard enough to shake the house. Moments later, Claire's footsteps came down the stairs. She appeared in the doorway of my workshop, her face flushed, eyes red. "Can I stay down here for a while?" she asked quietly. "Of course," I said, motioning to the extra stool. "Want to help me with this pocket watch? The spring needs adjusting." We worked side by side in silence for a while. After about 20 minutes, she spoke again. "I did not know," she said softly, "about what they did. I thought you were being cruel, making them pay rent when they were already struggling." "And now?" I asked. "Now I know they caused their own problems." She handed me a tiny gear with careful fingers. "Ethan tried to tell me, but I did not want to listen. I wanted to believe Mom's version where you were the bad guy." "It is easier to believe a story where someone else is at fault," I said. "Facing the truth takes courage." She looked at me, 16 years old and already learning that her parents were not who she thought they were. "Are you going to make them leave?" she asked. "Only if they fail to meet their obligations," I replied. "The agreement is clear, $2,400 a month. Miss a payment, and they are in default." "Do you think they will make it?" I thought about the collection agency chasing them for $67,300, about the court proceedings looming, about how thin their margin had become. "I think they will try very hard," I said. "Whether they succeed depends on the choices they make from here on out." On April 20th, I met Greg again at Precision Home Development's office. He pulled up an email on his computer. "We have a potential buyer for Lakeview Avenue," he said. "Young executive couple. Pre-approved but cautious. They want a second, deeper appraisal before committing. Would you be willing to do a more detailed evaluation, looking for any issues that could affect value?" "When do they need it?" I asked. "By May 15th. I agreed without hesitation. I already knew what a closer inspection would reveal. Houses always had hidden flaws. The only question was whether those flaws were significant enough to justify another adjustment. As I drove home that afternoon, I thought about how the layers of irony kept stacking neatly on top of one another. Daniel and Melissa's dream house was slipping farther out of reach with every professional report I submitted. The money they had stolen from me was now indirectly funding my ability to dismantle their fantasy piece by piece. I had learned that justice did not always arrive wearing uniforms or carrying handcuffs. Sometimes it showed up as market analysis, comparative sales data, and professionally documented facts. Sometimes it was quiet, methodical, and entirely legal. And sometimes that made it even more powerful. April 25th arrived unseasonably warm. I stood alone inside the empty house at 234 Lakeview Avenue, clipboard tucked under my arm, examining every inch with the practiced eye of someone who had done this work for decades. At first glance, the finishes were impressive. Granite countertops, polished hardwood floors, high-end appliances gleaming under the lights. But I was not there to admire surfaces. I was there to assess substance. In the basement, I found hairline cracks running along a section of the foundation wall. Not catastrophic, but troubling. There were signs of minor water intrusion, old but clearly recurring. Outside, the grading around the foundation was wrong, sloped toward the house instead of away from it, funneling water directly where it did not belong. In the crawl space, ventilation was insufficient, the kind of oversight that would not cause immediate disaster, but would almost certainly lead to moisture damage and mold issues within 5 years. I photographed everything. I documented every finding. Then I calculated remediation costs, foundation stabilization, drainage correction, crawl space ventilation upgrades. Estimated total, $45,000. Any informed buyer would demand those issues be addressed. My report was clear and unemotional. While the property presents well cosmetically, structural inspection reveals foundation drainage deficiencies and ventilation issues requiring approximately $45,000 in remedial work. Adjusted market value accounting for necessary repairs, $1,105,000. I submitted the report on April 30th. On May 2nd, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was tight, restrained by sheer effort. "I know what you're doing." I set the watch I had been repairing gently onto my workbench. "What am I doing, Daniel?" "That house on Lakeview," he snapped. "It dropped again, down to 1.1. A realtor friend told me the developer cited structural issues from a recent evaluation." His voice rose. "You are working for them, aren't you? You are deliberately destroying that house's value." "I am performing professional real estate appraisal services," I said calmly. "When a property has issues that materially affect its value, I have an ethical obligation to disclose them. Do you have a problem with professional ethics?" The silence on the line was thick with helpless anger. He knew. He knew I was involved. He knew I was influencing the outcome. He knew that every dollar shaved off that listing price was another nail driven into the coffin of their dream. And he also knew there was nothing he could do about it. My work was legitimate. My analysis was objective. The fact that it aligned perfectly with poetic justice was simply timing. "You are destroying us," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "You destroyed yourselves when you stole from me. I am just making sure you live with the consequences." He hung up. On May 8th, Melissa came to my study. She looked different, thinner, smaller somehow. The confidence she once wore like armor had evaporated. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by generic brands. She stood in the doorway, hesitant. "I found a house," she said flatly, "in Stamford, $485,000. Not Greenwich, but it is decent. Good neighborhood. Good schools for the kids." "Congratulations," I said. "We need to get pre-approved," she continued. Then she stopped, swallowed. "I was hoping maybe you could write a letter to the bank, saying we are current on rent, that we are reliable." I looked at her carefully. "What is your credit score right now?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. 520. "The collections agency filed." "Yes." "And you believe a letter from me will convince a bank to lend you nearly $500,000 while you are actively in collections with a credit score in the basement?" "I thought," her voice cracked, "I thought maybe you would help. For Claire and Ethan, they deserve stability." "Claire and Ethan have stability," I said evenly. "They live in this house. This house is not going anywhere. You and Daniel created your situation. Every consequence you are facing comes directly from choices you made." "We made mistakes." "You committed fraud repeatedly over 3 years," I said calmly. "A mistake is accidental. What you did was deliberate theft." She left without another word. That night, I heard her crying through the walls. The sound was muted, but unmistakable. I felt no satisfaction in it, only a quiet certainty that accountability had finally arrived where it belonged. On May 12th, a certified letter arrived. Consolidated Credit Recovery had filed a lawsuit against Daniel and Melissa Turner. Amount: $67,300 plus interest and legal fees. Court date: June 16th. The clock on my workbench ticked steadily, each second falling exactly where it should. Justice, I had learned, was never loud. It was precise. That night, they came to my study together. Daniel looked washed out, his skin pale and tight. Melissa's eyes were red and swollen, like she had been crying for hours. "We need help," Daniel said, dropping any attempt at pride. "The collections agency is suing us. If they get a judgment, they can garnish our wages. They can seize accounts. We will lose everything." I folded my hands on the desk and looked at him steadily. "What exactly do you want from me?" He hesitated, then forced the words out. "Help us settle it. Talk to them. Maybe if you—" He stopped, the reality of the request catching up with him. His shoulders slumped. "I do not even know what I am asking anymore." "Maybe if I testified that you did not commit fraud," I said calmly, "or vouched for your character, or paid the debt for you." Melissa stepped forward quickly. "We will pay you back, every cent. Just help us with this one thing, and we swear we will—" "You are already paying me back," I cut in. $600 a month toward the $34,000 you stole from my retirement account. At that rate, you will finish in just under 5 years. As for the $67,000 charged to fraudulent credit cards, that is not my responsibility. You made those charges. You deal with the consequences." Daniel swallowed hard. "We could file for bankruptcy." "You could," I said. "That is your legal right. But it will not erase the promissory note you signed with me. That debt survives bankruptcy. And if you file, I will have grounds to evict you immediately due to a material adverse change in your financial situation." They stood there, trapped. Every path that once seemed like an escape had been closed off, one by one. There were no shortcuts left, no loopholes, no one else to blame. You should negotiate a payment plan with the collections agency, I said. They usually prefer monthly payments over pursuing a judgment. It will cost you more in interest, but it is better than wage garnishment. They left my study without another word. After they were gone, I opened my laptop and pulled up the final appraisal documentation for 234 Lakeview Avenue. I sent it to Greg on May 15th, just as requested. The response came back later that day. The buyers had reviewed the report, noted the foundation issues and required repairs, and walked away. Greg's email was brief and candid. They are passing. Property is likely to sit. We may need to drop the price further to attract someone willing to take on the repairs. Thinking $980,000. $980,000, $360,000 less than what Daniel had demanded I help finance with a $100,000 down payment. I closed my laptop and went down to the workshop. Ethan was already there, bent over the clock movement we had been restoring together. Mom and Dad are freaking out, he said quietly. They got sued. I know. Is that part of your plan? No, I said honestly. That is a consequence of their actions. The collections agency would have sued them no matter what I did. The timing is just convenient. They hate you now. I looked at him carefully. They hated me the moment I said no to $100,000. They hated me when I protected my house. They hated me every time I refused to let them use me. Their anger is not new. It is just honest now. Ethan nodded, absorbing that. Claire moved into the spare bedroom, he added. She said she cannot stand being around Mom anymore. How is she holding up? Better, he said. She actually talks now, about real things. She wants to learn clock restoration, too. She is welcome any time, I said. We worked in comfortable silence. Above us, through floors and walls, Daniel and Melissa's voices rose and fell again, arguments about money, the lawsuit, the future they believed had been stolen from them. Their dream house had fallen from $1,340,000 to an estimated $980,000. My professional evaluations, grounded in objective market data and structural analysis, had carved hundreds of thousands of dollars out of a fantasy built on my trust. And the truth was, there was nothing vindictive about it. It was legal, ethical, thorough. Sometimes consequences did not need theatrics. Sometimes they just needed precision. May slid into June with relentless heat, the kind that made Connecticut feel unfamiliar. I watched everything unfold from my air-conditioned study, tracking numbers on spreadsheets with the same disciplined attention I had once devoted to property valuations. Daniel and Melissa's finances deteriorated the way a house with a compromised foundation always does. Slowly at first, then all at once. Their social media told the story better than any report ever could. Melissa's once polished Instagram feed went dark. The last post, sometime in mid-April, showed a generic sunset and a caption about appreciating simple things. The comments were few. The people she had once been desperate to impress no longer bothered to engage. I knew because Claire showed me one afternoon in the workshop, holding her phone out while I adjusted the mainspring on a pocket watch from 1912. She deleted almost everything, Claire said. All the Miami pictures, the designer stuff, even the posts about the house on Lakeview. People notice when the image disappears, I said, especially when the image was the only thing holding their attention. Claire had become a regular presence in my workshop over the past month. Watching her grow from an angry, defensive teenager into a thoughtful young woman was one of the few bright spots in this entire ordeal. She picked up a tiny brass gear and held it up to the light. Ethan says you taught him that every piece matters, that if one gear is off, the whole thing fails. That is true for watches, I said quietly. And for people, she added after a moment. I nodded, because by then we both understood that truth perfectly. Also true for justice, I said. Claire looked at me in a way that reminded me sharply of my own father. The man who had raised me to believe integrity was not something you negotiated away when it became inconvenient. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "Justice? What would you call it?" She thought for a moment, then set the gear down gently. "I would call it watching someone finally face the consequences they spent 3 years running from." She paused, "which I guess really is justice." Upstairs, I could hear Melissa on the phone again. Her voice carried through the vents, strained and overly cheerful, as she begged for extra shifts at the retail store, evening hours, weekend coverage, anything. The same woman who once posted about spa days and shopping trips was now pleading for the chance to work herself to exhaustion. On June 3rd, Daniel received the call that locked their future into place. I was in my study when his phone rang. I heard his cautious greeting, then silence, long, heavy silence. From where I sat, I could not see him, but I knew that look, the gray cast of a man realizing there was no way out. "What are the terms?" he asked finally, his voice flat. More silence. 72,458, he repeated. A pause. "That includes interest." Another pause. 12 months, 6,038 per month. His voice cracked just slightly. "Fine, send the paperwork." 10 minutes later, he came down the stairs. He looked like he had aged 10 years in that short walk. He stopped in my study doorway, not stepping inside, just standing there like someone waiting for a sentence to be read. "The collections agency called," he said. "They are offering a payment plan. 12 months, 6,038 a month, or they sue and get a judgment." I set my pen down slowly. That is generous of them. A judgment would mean wage garnishment and asset seizure. This was their softer option. "We cannot afford 6,000 a month," he said quietly. "With what we are already paying you, we are drowning." "Then you will need to increase your income," I replied evenly. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Increase my income? Right. Because jobs are just lining up for someone with my credit score and record." "You found your current job," I said. "Find another, work nights, work weekends. Melissa can take on more hours. These are the consequences of spending $67,300 that did not belong to you." "You enjoy this," he said. It was not a question. "Watching us struggle, watching us lose everything." "I take satisfaction in accountability," I replied. "There is a difference." He left without another word. On June 8th, I reviewed my own records. 5 months of payments from Daniel and Melissa. $2,400 each month. $12,000 total paid toward the $34,000 they had taken from my retirement account. Balance remaining, $22,000. At the current rate, another 11 months. I laid out their full financial picture. To me, $2,400 per month for 11 more months. To the collections agency, $6,038 per month for 12 months. Total monthly obligation, $8,438. Their combined income was roughly $6,200 before taxes. After deductions, closer to $4,800. The math did not work. They would need to nearly double their income just to meet their obligations, not including food, utilities, transportation, or insurance. It was almost elegant in its inevitability. Bankruptcy would not erase the debt to me. Defaulting on my agreement meant immediate eviction. Defaulting on the collections plan meant court judgment. They were trapped. On June 12th, an envelope arrived from Precision Home Development. I opened it in my study, already knowing the contents. Greg's message was enthusiastic. "Robert, the board is extremely pleased with your work. Your evaluations have been consistently accurate and professional. We would like to extend your contract for another year at an increased rate of $9,200 per month. The formal offer was enclosed. I signed and returned it that same day. That evening, Ethan found me in my workshop as I cleaned tools and reorganized the bench. He sat on his usual stool, quiet for a long moment, before speaking. "Dad is looking for a second job," he said. "I heard him talking to a warehouse about night shifts." "That is practical," I replied. "Mom is trying to get promoted to assistant manager," he added. "She thinks it might add $400 a month." I nodded, making notes in my ledger. Every watch in my collection was documented. Purchase price, restoration cost, estimated value, precision mattered. "Grandpa," Ethan asked carefully, "why do you still let them live here?" It was a fair question. I could have evicted them months earlier. It would have been legal. Justified. Immediately satisfying. But I had chosen something else. "Because justice is not only about punishment," I said, setting my pen down. "It is about understanding. If I throw them out, they become victims in their own story. Poor Daniel and Melissa, ruined by my cruelty. But if they stay here, paying every month, watching their lifestyle shrink while they repay what they stole, they learn something they cannot forget." He considered that, then nodded slowly. Above us, the house creaked and settled, old beams bearing new weight. Time, I had learned, was the most effective teacher of all. "You think they will actually learn?" Ethan asked. "I think they will not steal from anyone else," I replied, meeting his eyes. "Sometimes that is the best outcome you can realistically expect." He nodded slowly, then reached for the pocket watch on the workbench, an 1887 model that was nearly finished after weeks of careful restoration. "Claire wants to help with this one," he said. "She says she likes that broken things can be fixed if you are patient enough." I smiled. "Then we will finish it together, all three of us." Upstairs, in the house they had tried to take from me, Daniel and Melissa were drowning in the consequences of their own decisions. Their credit was wrecked. Their plans were in ruins. Their future was mortgaged to repay debts they had created with lies and forged signatures. Down in my basement, surrounded by the precise, orderly mechanisms of antique timepieces, something finally settled inside me. Not quite satisfaction, not quite peace, but something close enough to both. Justice, I had learned, did not always arrive with drama or noise. Sometimes it worked quietly, methodical and unavoidable, ticking forward like the gears of a well-made watch. June 16th arrived under clear skies, heat shimmering off the courthouse steps downtown. I did not attend the hearing. The lawsuit between Daniel and Melissa and Consolidated Credit Recovery did not require my presence. At 11:30 that morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Richard Harris read, "Settlement approved. 12 monthly payments of $6,038. They are locked in." I was sitting at Miller's Coffee House when the text came through. I read it twice, set my phone down, and allowed myself a brief moment of honest satisfaction. On June 20th, I called a family meeting. They gathered in my dining room at 2 o'clock sharp. Daniel, Melissa, Claire, Ethan. Richard sat beside me, his briefcase open, documents arranged with careful precision. I had asked Claire and Ethan to be there because they deserved to understand what had happened. They deserved to see that actions had consequences, that manipulation and theft did not simply vanish, and that sometimes the person you try to exploit is stronger than you expect. Daniel and Melissa sat across from me, both visibly worn down by 6 months of pressure. Daniel had lost weight, his collar loose around his neck. Melissa looked like a different person entirely, no makeup. Hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. designer labels replaced by plain, inexpensive clothes. I laid the documents out one by one. Credit card statements totaling $67,300 in fraudulent charges. The forged power of attorney used to take $34,000 from my retirement account. The 2 failed quitclaim deeds attempting to transfer ownership of my home. Taylor Bishop's investigative report, bank records, everything. For 3 years, I said calmly, you systematically stole from me. You used my identity to open credit cards and spent the money on luxury items, travel, and lifestyle expenses. You forged my signature to access my retirement savings. You attempted twice to steal my house through fraudulent property filings. Melissa's face drained of color. Daniel stared at the papers as if they were exhibits in his own criminal trial. The total amount you stole or attempted to steal, I continued, was $146,300. Credit cards, retirement funds, attempted home equity fraud. I let the number sit in the air. And when that was not enough, you demanded another $100,000 for a house you could not afford. We made mistakes, Daniel began. You committed fraud, I interrupted evenly. Multiple felonies, identity theft, forgery. I have more than enough evidence here to pursue criminal charges that would send both of you to prison. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. Claire did not move, her eyes fixed on the documents. But I did not do that, I went on. Instead, I gave you a choice. Repay what you stole or face prosecution. You chose repayment. I opened my ledger and turned it so they could see. In 5 months, you have paid $12,000 toward the $34,000 taken from my retirement account. $22,000 remains. You are also legally committed to paying consolidated credit recovery $6,038 per month for the next 12 months to resolve the fraudulent credit card debt. The number spoke louder than anything else. Your total monthly debt obligation, I said, is $8,438. Your combined household income after taxes is approximately $4,800. I looked directly at them. You are underwater by nearly $4,000 every month. That is not sustainable. Daniel swallowed hard. What do you want from us? He asked, his voice barely audible. I want you to face reality, I said. You have 2 options. You can remain in this house and continue making every payment, living within the limits created by your own actions. Or you can move out and make those same payments somewhere else. The debts do not disappear either way. Bankruptcy will not erase the promissory note you signed with me. The settlement agreement is binding. Your credit will remain damaged for years. I paused, letting the weight of it settle. If you stay here, I said finally, you follow my rules. You pay every dollar you owe. You work whatever jobs are necessary. You live honestly. No more lies. No more schemes. The room was silent. For the first time, there was nothing left for them to argue. You respect this house, I continued, and you respect the fact that it is my property, not yours. And when Claire and Ethan turn 18, you allow them to decide for themselves what kind of relationship they want with me. Melissa's face collapsed in on itself, not quite tears, but close. The woman who once posted about designer handbags and Greenwich listings was now staring down a future defined by retail schedules, second jobs, and debt payments. Daniel's shoulders sagged. Whatever defiance he had left drained out of him completely. "We will stay," he said quietly. "Say it properly," I replied, keeping my voice calm. He looked up and met my eyes. For the first time in 3 years, I saw something close to understanding, not remorse, not repentance, but recognition. "We will stay," he said again. "We will make the payments. We will follow your rules." His voice was flat, exhausted. "We do not have any other option." "You had options," I said evenly. You made your choices when you forged my signature. You are living with them now." They left the room without another word. I asked Richard to stay behind. Claire and Ethan remained as well, sitting quietly at the table. "On June 24th, I said, I am updating my will." Richard opened a folder and slid a document forward. "The structure is simple. 50% of your estate will go into a trust for Claire and Ethan, accessible when they turn 25. The remaining 50% will go to a charitable foundation dedicated to historical preservation." I looked at my grandchildren. Daniel and Melissa received nothing. They already took their inheritance and spent it. Now they are repaying it. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand tightly. "The house, my investments, my collections, everything is protected," I said. "Everything is documented. When the time comes, you will be taken care of." I paused, then softened my tone. "But that day is a long way off. Right now, we have a pocket watch to finish restoring." On June 24th, I sat in Richard's office as a notary witnessed my signature on the revised will. Every page, every clause, each one ensuring that the people who tried to steal my legacy would receive nothing from it. June 28th arrived on a quiet Sunday evening. The heat had broken, leaving behind warm air and clear skies. In my workshop, Claire, Ethan, and I gathered around the workbench. The 1887 pocket watch lay in pieces before us, every component cleaned, restored, and ready. "This is the last part," Claire said, holding up the balance wheel. "Once this is in, it should run." "Then let us see if all our work paid off," I said. We worked together carefully. Ethan held the magnifying glass steady. Claire positioned the balance wheel with precise fingers. I secured it with my jeweler's screwdriver, each turn deliberate. When the final screw was set, I wound the crown slowly. 3 turns. 4. The watch began to tick. Steady. Even. Perfect. 138 years after it was made, the mechanism ran as smoothly as it ever had. Claire smiled broadly. Ethan laughed out loud. Something in my chest loosened. Not quite joy, but something very close. "Grandpa," Claire said softly, watching the second hand sweep around the dial, "did you ever think about just forgiving them? Mom and Dad? Letting it all go?" I considered her question carefully. Forgiveness and consequences are not opposites. I could forgive them for being weak, for being greedy, for making terrible decisions. But forgiveness does not mean erasing accountability. "They stole from me," I said. "They need to repay that debt. That is justice." I looked at the watch, its hands moving steadily forward. "After they finish paying, then they will have learned something important, that actions matter, that you cannot steal, manipulate, and lie without paying the price." Ethan picked up the watch and held it to his ear, listening to the rhythmic ticking. "You gave them the biggest chance possible," he said. "The chance to become honest." "Exactly," I replied. "What they do with that chance is up to them." Upstairs, I could hear Daniel and Melissa moving around, preparing for another week of work, another round of payments, another month of consequences. Their dream house had fallen to $980,000. Their credit was shattered. Their social ambitions were gone. Their future was committed to paying back what they had taken. And down in my basement workshop, surrounded by the precise mechanics of restored timepieces and the grandchildren who had chosen truth over lies, I felt the quiet satisfaction of justice done properly. The watch ticked steadily, seconds turning into minutes, minutes into hours. Every gear in place, every component doing exactly what it was designed to do. Some people spend their lives chasing shortcuts, stealing what they did not earn, lying their way toward comfort. They never learn that broken trust, like a broken watch, demands patience and care to repair, and some damage once done leaves marks that never fully disappear. I smiled, listening to the steady rhythm of craftsmanship restored, balance maintained, justice served. Time moved forward, second by second, toward whatever came next.